What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Carly. Nice to meet you. I am a labor and postpartum doula, and I create content all about pregnancy and labor and motherhood and pretty much everything that falls in between. And something has always kind of sat wrong with me when it comes to breastfeeding and fertility. There's this conception that if you're breastfeeding, you can't get pregnant. And a lot of people take that as the Bible word of advice that if they're breastfeeding, they got nothing to worry about. And A, I'm here to tell you that is just not true for everybody. And B, I'm here to tell you that if you do want to get pregnant while you're breastfeeding, it might still be an option for you. In today's video, we are going to unpack all the information about fertility while you're breastfeeding, if it's an actual form of birth control and a way to avoid pregnancy, if there are any options out there for you to track your ovulation and fertility plan while you're breastfeeding, and just like debunk some of the myths that are floating around out there about breastfeeding and fertility. A huge thank you to Inito for sponsoring a portion of today's video, but more on them in a bit. So let's start with the basics. Can you get pregnant while you're breastfeeding? Yes. The simple answer is yes. Yes, you can. Now, these conversations are always very interesting to have because we're talking about most of the time. In most cases, there are people who are going to be outside of the window of normal. That doesn't make you abnormal. It just means you're outside of this specific window we're talking about. So most people will experience a period of about 6 weeks where you aren't ovulating if you are breastfeeding. So why is this the case? It's because whenever you're breastfeeding, your body is producing a hormone called prolactin. And prolactin is a natural suppressant for other hormones like estrogen and progesterone, which are two hormones that you need in order to facilitate ovulation. So the more you're breastfeeding, the more you are producing that prolactin hormone, and less likely it is that you're going to ovulate and then subsequently have a period. Now, you may have heard of the LAM method, which is the lactation amenorrhea method. This is a method of birth control that reduces your risk of becoming pregnant down to a very small percentage. But the issue with this method is that you just don't exactly know. You don't have any data, you don't have any information about whether or not you're ovulating. You have to remember that when you ovulate, you're ovulating before your period shows up. So when you can fall pregnant, you haven't had a period yet. So you don't necessarily know that you're ovulating before you do it unless you're tracking your cycle, which is tough to do when you have an irregular period due to the fact that you are breastfeeding. So during those first few months when you're breastfeeding a newborn and they're very much so more demanding, during those first 3 to 6 months, your baby is going to probably request more frequent feedings than they will when they're, say, 12 months old or 18 months old. If you're breastfeeding into that time of their lives, during those first few months, your baby is nursing every like 3 to 4 hours, and they're likely not sleeping through the night yet. And so if your baby isn't sleeping through the night and they're waking up to nurse every 4 to 6 hours, or even every 4 to 8 hours, your body is going to be producing a lot of prolactin that's going to continue to suppress the hormones that you need in order to facilitate ovulation. So as long as you're really on that consistent feeding schedule and basically exclusively breastfeeding your baby, there is a likelihood that your cycle is going to be irregular. And even if you have an experience like I personally did, which is my baby would randomly kind of go through these spouts of sleeping through the night, and every single time she would sleep through the night, I would wake up with a period in like 2 days. It was consistent. I had back-to-back periods almost within like a 3-week window, which is very strange for me. I know my cycle, and I know my cycle is generally the same amount of time every single month, and this was like 2 back-to-back way sooner than they usually are. And the reason was that she was sleeping through the night a couple of days in a row, and so my prolactin dropped and I wasn't producing as much, and so that allowed other hormones that we need in order for an ovulation to take place to happen sooner. And another thing to note about the LAM method is that it's only effective, and this is not even 100% effective, just like 98 to 99% effective up until 6 months old, and you have to have not experienced a cycle. So if you do experience a cycle, even if it's just a one-off cycle and your baby is less than 6 months old, it's not going to have the same percentage of effectiveness as it would if you hadn't had your cycle return. Let's let's talk about my personal experience with breastfeeding and my period and like tracking fertility and all that kind of stuff. My birth control method of choice is natural family planning, i.e., using a basal thermometer to track my basal temperature every single morning, tracking my cycle, knowing when my cycle starts, when I'm planning to ovulate, and confirming ovulation with an OPK. If you're new to natural family planning and using a basal thermometer to track your cycles, I will link a video for you right here. I have a whole playlist that is like a fertility playlist where I talk about my ovulation journal and how we use that to conceive our second child and all that kind of information. So if that's something you want to check out, I will link it for you above. There are actually multiple options for tracking your fertility at home that have come onto the market in the last year, 2 years. Since I started, I've been using natural family planning for, I think, around 7 years now. So I'm pretty familiar with my cycle, but there are so many new options that have not been available. I really feel like are starting to change the way we're able to interact with our hormones and our fertility and our cycles and just getting to know our bodies so much better that are available to us that haven't been available before. For instance, let's enter Inito into the chat. Inito is the only fertility monitor that measures all 4 hormones on a single test strip, showing you a full picture of your cycle with results unique to your body. This helps you predict and confirm your actual ovulation based on data that you're getting from your own body. So unlike most ovulation tests that give you a yes or no result, Inito provides you real numerical value to give you insight into your fertility, which for me personally, being in this season of my life where I'm breastfeeding and my cycles are irregular and I really don't have a specific set regular period to go off of whenever I used to when I wasn't breastfeeding, it was very straightforward. It was, it was like the moon every single month. It had the same exact cycle. If there was a full moon, I knew I was going to start my period the same day. Everything lined up so beautifully and it was really intuitive to track my cycle. But because I'm breastfeeding, that intuitivity is kind of missing. So because I'm in this season of my life where my cycle is so irregular, having exact numerical data to see where my hormones are, when they're showing up, when they aren't showing up, it has made such a huge difference in me feeling really confident in using natural family planning as our birth control method. So even though right now in this season of our life, we aren't looking to conceive, having all this data and information is so helpful in actually avoiding conception. But if you're somebody who is looking to conceive and you're breastfeeding, this is probably the #1 tool I would recommend you to get your hands on in order to make that process just a little bit more intuitive and a little bit easier. With Inito, you can track your fertility hormones at home in just 5 minutes and get accurate results for 4 hormones: estrogen, luteinizing hormone, progesterone, and FSH. And I'm just all about finding different tools that we can use to empower ourselves with more knowledge about our bodies and have that data on hand to give to your provider so that you can have a conversation with them about what you're experiencing. And it truly just lights me up to see a product like this available to us on the market that can make such a big difference in our experiences trying to conceive or not conceive. I want to share my personal experience using the product. I have been testing it out over the last few months, and I have lots of information to report back. I have mostly pros. I have a few cons that I want to talk about too, but I want to talk about kind of my whole experience using it. So, like I said, I have been doing the fertility awareness method for years. So I have a good understanding of kind of like my baseline, what's normal, but I never had this much information available to me. And it's been so fascinating to look at these hormones and just have a really well-rounded kind of understanding of what's going on every single month. So you track everything on your phone. There is an Inito app and it will show you every single month a hormone chart of what levels your hormones are for those 4 hormones we talked about earlier. Now it's interesting because like I said, while I'm breastfeeding, my period is a little bit more irregular, a little more on and off and just kind of like unexpected. And while I was using the Inito monitor, I was able to really hone in on when I had those rises in hormones and really just confirm when my ovulation happened. Even though I've had periods before, it was kind of difficult to know, is this a period? Is this just spotting? Is this, did I ovulate? Is this just kind of like my body catching up in this weird way? I felt very confused and like out of touch with my period because everything was so different. I was bleeding differently. The consistency, the color, the frequency, all those things were very different about my cycle and about bleeding. And so this was really helpful because it helped me see when I had my peak fertility, when I ovulated. It confirmed ovulation for me, and it was just really insightful to see these charts. So clearly the information is very helpful, but let's talk about the functionality of the actual monitor. So this is what the monitor looks like. It is very sleek and beautiful, really trim. It's not super, super bulky in comparison to, say, the Daisy thermometer that I have been using to do like my basal temperature every single month. It is comparable in size. It's not crazy bulky. I traveled during both cycles, actually. I was taking these tests while I was traveling. So it packed away really nicely. It wasn't something I was worried about, and it just fit in my bag very easily. Now, let's talk about the actual tests themselves. They look very similar to a pregnancy test. They are really nice to touch, which I know sounds kind of strange, but when you're doing something like this every single day, you want to kind of enjoy the experience. So the experience of using these is very seamless. It's very intuitive. The app walks you through everything that you need to do. It's very straightforward. I felt very taken care of throughout the whole experience. And it gives you exactly the information that you need in order to properly use the test. So one thing that I noticed that was kind of annoying is that you have to do it every single day, which is a lot when you consider how long it takes for the test to actually run. It takes 5 minutes for the test to work. You have to remove your phone from its phone case. You slide the monitor onto the back, and it uses your camera on your phone. So it attaches just like this. You pee into a cup, you dip the test into the cup for 15 seconds. There's a timer on the app, which is very helpful. After the 15 seconds, you take this part off, cover that side, and this is the side that you insert into the actual monitor, just like that. And then you have to leave it laying flat on your counter for 5 minutes. So one thing to think about is that it takes 5 minutes to do the actual test. And then after you do the test, there's also a period of time where it's like processing. So overall, the whole process takes around 20 minutes. And when you're doing that every single morning, it can just get a little cumbersome. But if you're somebody who is in a position where you're trying to optimize your fertility in order to conceive, you're usually willing to do a little bit of legwork like that. But it's something to note. Another thing that is worth mentioning is that the monitors are specific to your phone type. So when I got this monitor, I was using an iPhone 11. Since receiving my monitor, I have upgraded my phone to a different model. So now my Inito monitor does not work with that model. The monitor just sits into a clip, so I'm just wondering if you have a different clip, perhaps it's something that you can swap out pretty easily. Another thing to note is that if you're an Android user, unfortunately, the Inito monitor does not work for you at this point in time. So that is definitely something to think about. Now, let's talk about price point. To get your hands on the Inito starter kit, you will be looking at a price tag of $149, but it is HSA and FSA eligible, which is really helpful. The price point for the starter kit I actually think is quite reasonable. The part that gets me is the cost of the pack of 15 test strips. The cost of one pack of 15 test strips is $49. And if you buy more than 2 packs of the test strips, then they do apply a coupon for you, so you will save a little bit of money that way. But that's pretty pricey, especially because in order to get a really well-rounded picture of your hormones, you're going to want to be tracking really frequently, if not daily. And so those first few months, you might be spending a little bit of extra money because you're going to be testing way more frequently than you would once the monitor has a better understanding of your unique cycle. So those are just a couple of things to think about. I don't think that they are cons to the extent that I wouldn't use the product by any means, but just something to think about whenever you are considering making this purchase. But overall, after having my hands on this and testing it out, is absolutely a product I would recommend, especially if you're somebody who is breastfeeding and trying to conceive, or if you're somebody who's just trying to conceive in general, Or even like I'm really passionate about knowing a lot about my cycle. So I would consider this something that I would want to have in my arsenal for understanding my cycle, even though I'm trying not to conceive, because it gives me really clean cut, clear information about when I'm ovulating. And that's really important to know if you're trying not to get pregnant as well. So again, a huge thank you to Inito for sponsoring this portion of today's video. Let's talk about a couple of other signs that you can keep your eye out for if you are breastfeeding and wondering if you're ovulating or not. Another thing you can monitor is your cervical mucus. This is something that is free and easy, and you don't have to do any monitoring. This is just something that you can pay attention to as you are going about your life. You might notice that there is an increase in cervical mucus. You might notice that the texture of your cervical mucus is changing as you approach ovulation. There's actually this new book that was just released that I am obsessed with. It's called Cycles. I will link it down below. You can get it on Amazon. It is so helpful for understanding the different phases of your cycle, and especially if you're somebody who's looking to track your cervical mucus and just get more familiar with your body in that way. There is kind of a standard change in your cervical mucus that you can pay attention to. And especially if you're breastfeeding, you'll notice that when you are approaching this again, it's going to stand out to you more so because you haven't been experiencing it for so long, that you're going to notice when your cervical mucus increases, when it changes in texture, it's going to start to get sticky again. It's going to turn into that egg white texture. And then eventually it's going to get clear. And that's how you know when you're about to ovulate, because that luteinizing hormone is going to increase and it's going to turn into that consistency that we all are familiar with, but you're going to be able to kind of assign meaning to it and know that when that's happening to you, you are about to ovulate. So that's another way that you can kind of keep an eye out for when your cycle might be returning while you're breastfeeding. But for me, I feel like one of the most helpful things you can do is chart your cycle. Like I said earlier, I have a video where I talk all about how I chart my cycle, and I will link it for you down below and up in the cards so that you can go and take a look at it if that's something that you want to learn more about. But charting your cycle and understanding how your body works is such an invaluable skill to learn, especially when your body is going through this time of your life when you are breastfeeding and your hormones are constantly shifting. Just being aware of what's going on and taking note of it and paying attention to it and just like being gentle with yourself during this time is so, so important. But that is going to do it for today's video, you guys. I hope you found this information helpful and useful to you, especially if you are somebody who is breastfeeding and trying to regain some understanding and knowledge about your fertility and your ovulation. If you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button. I would love to have you as a part of this empowering community. I upload new videos every single week, and give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed it. It really, really helps me out in knowing what you guys like to see, and I will see you guys in next week's video.